So I'm Ronan Doorley, I'm a PhD student at Trinity College Dublin, and so today I'm going to talk a little bit about a specific innovation that I worked on as part of my PhD research, which was developing a low-cost pollution sensing node. Okay, so I'll just start with a little bit of motivation behind this work. So traditionally, urban air pollution would be measured by these kinds of analyzers, which would be housed in fixed site monitoring stations, and these stations would be sparsely located in urban areas, and then even more sparse as you start to move away from the major urban centres. And so the analyzers themselves, you would have a separate analyzer for each pollutant that you want to measure, and they would be quite large and bulky and fairly expensive. So there are a number of kind of drawbacks of this type of approach to air pollution monitoring. So this is just a very simple model of air pollution in urban areas. So you can kind of think of the street level concentration as being a combination of a regional background concentration plus an urban increment, contributions from point sources, and then street level contributions. So basically what this means is that street level concentrations can be highly variable, and also as you move away from the street level, the concentrations of a lot of pollutants can decline very rapidly. So essentially, if you're not measuring right at the street level, you're probably missing a lot of this kind of red and yellow bit. And also, even if you are, say, measuring directly at the street level, say at the quays, there could be much higher levels at, say, Pier Street, and you would have no way of being able to tell. Okay, so there is this, in the past few years, this new kind of approach to air pollution monitoring that's been emerging, which is based on using networks of distributed or even mobile low-cost pollution sensors. And so this is partly driven by the problems that I was just speaking about, but also due to advances in technology like compact sensor technology, as well as the electronics for data logging and communication networks. And so these are just two of the kind of platforms that are gaining popularity at the moment. One of them is the Air Quality Egg, which is a crowd-based pollution monitoring platform. So anybody can just order an air quality egg for about €200 and set it up, say, on your windowsill, and then connect it to your Wi-Fi, and it would upload your air quality data to the Air Quality Egg site. And then you have the Libellium, which is more popular kind of with in industry and with academics. So both of these platforms are kind of very user-friendly, kind of plug-and-play platforms, but the actual air quality sensors they use are sort of not quite accurate at parts per billion levels, so they're more accurate really just for kind of indicative air quality measurements. So the basic idea about any of these types of platforms, though, is that you sacrifice some measurement accuracy in order to gain in terms of spatial resolution. So then you can have kind of a dense network of air quality sensors that can supplement the highly accurate information that you're getting from your fixed site monitoring stations. And so the main kind of challenges with developing and implementing a network of sensors like this, the main thing really is the quality of the data. So there are a lot of these kind of low-cost air quality monitors on the market at the moment, and as I said, most of them are only really accurate to parts per million levels rather than parts per billion, which is what you'd really need for, say, reporting requirements. Another thing is integration of data from multiple sources. So if you're using your highly accurate fixed site monitoring station data as well as this, you're supplementing that with the less accurate data. So how do you kind of integrate that data and take account of the varying levels of confidence you have? And then the third thing is the visualization and communication of this data, since there's potential for much higher spatial and temporal resolution, so we kind of need to figure out how do we communicate that well, whether visually or otherwise. So in my work, I was kind of trying to focus more on the first point, so looking to see if we could develop a mobile sensing node that would have sensing accuracy that would be comparable to the traditional fixed site monitoring stations. So the kind of specific requirements we had, we wanted to develop a node that could sense nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, and particulates, just because these are the pollutants that are most closely tied to long-term health effects. As I said, we wanted it to be accurate at the parts per billion level, and wanted it to be calibrated with reference to kind of the high-fidelity equipment. Should obviously be compact and mobile, and should be spatially resolved, so there's a GPS tag along with every air quality measurement. So kind of the first, most important design decision then to make was what actual air quality sensors to use, since there are so many on the market at the moment now. So the ones after quite a bit of research, the ones that we ended up choosing were these AlphaSense B4 sensors for the gaseous pollutants. So these ones, they're quite small. They're about 1 inch in diameter, and they're quite cheap as well. Kind of about €200 per pollutant, which is a bit more expensive than the kind of sensors you'd see, say, in the air quality egg, but then they are accurate to the parts per billion level. And then for the particulates, we chose AlphaSense optical particle counter. And particulates, for anyone who's not familiar, it's kind of tiny little solid liquid particles suspended in the air. It's not dust, but you can kind of think of it as dust, and it's very bad for your health, basically. So this was our first prototype that we came up with. So as well as the actual sensors themselves, we needed something to actually capture the information from the sensors. So for that we used the Raspberry Pi. Anyone who's not familiar with the Raspberry Pi, it's a little mini computer. It's about the size of a credit card and costs about €30. There are even smaller and cheaper ones now, but this is the one that we used at the time. And so we put that with the sensors into this plastic enclosure with a battery, use a small vacuum pump to give a constant supply of air to the enclosure, and then for GPS location we just used a smartphone, which we could then link the data based on the timestamps. So this whole platform costs about €700. You could measure those 3 gases. Some problems with it were that the sampling rate wasn't quite as high as we wanted it to be, and wasn't ideal that the GPS was recorded on a separate device. So then soon after that we moved to a second prototype where we changed the Raspberry Pi for an Intel Galileo, which is another kind of a microcontroller that's popular for Internet of Things applications. Then we changed the phone for just a small GPS receiver which could communicate directly with the Intel Galileo, and then we added the optical particle counter for the particulates as well. And so we were able to then increase the sampling rate using the Intel Galileo as well. And this whole platform, so it measures 6 pollutants and costs about €1,100, so a lot cheaper than the kind of single pollutant analyzers that cost kind of 3 to 5 grand each. And also has the advantage of being compact and mobile, of course. So kind of the big question that we needed to answer was whether this sensing node could actually produce accurate data. So we did a series of co-located tests between our own node and the traditional fixed-site monitoring stations. So the picture here is from the DCC fixed-site monitoring station at Wine Tavern Street. So the inlets at the top here are the DCC inlets. This red inlet here is the inlet to our node, which is like the small grey box here. And then the plot on the bottom left here is a comparison between the NOx readings from our sensor compared to the NOx readings from the DCC sensor. And so you see there's really good linearity, good agreement between the two sensors. There's an R squared of about 0.96. And then the top left plot was from a similar test that we did between our optical particle counter and a much more expensive Grim optical particle counter. And again, you see really good agreement between the two. And so we did similar tests for all the different pollutants, and in each case we were satisfied that our sensors were actually recording accurately enough. So then the first few applications that we used this node for were related to exposure monitoring of cyclists in Dublin. So the top left plot here was from a study we did of cyclist exposure to nitrogen oxides while cycling in Dublin. So basically we got a cyclist to wear a backpack that contained our sensing node, which was sampling from the cyclist's breathing zone, and they just cycled around Dublin taking measurements. So there's a couple of interesting things out of this study. So you can see the kind of the big red area here, that's just on the south side of the Keys, close to Temple Bar, and we found that consistently in this particular area there was really high areas of NOx. So that's just kind of an example of the kind of information that you tend to miss if you just rely on fixed-site monitoring stations. We also found that the cycling facility had a big impact on the cyclist exposure. In particular, bus lanes have really high NOx exposure, which is so much higher than on-road and higher again than the separated cycling facilities. And then we're doing another study now which is looking at more pollutants, including the particulates. So the top right plot here is exposure to PM2.5 of the cyclists in Dublin. So So those initial applications that we have worked on so far are just kind of using one or a small number of sensing nodes to kind of answer more specific research questions. But I think the real kind of potential of this sort of technology is more in the larger scale deployments of these type of nodes around the city. So in particular, something that we'd be interested in looking at in the future would be something like deploying these nodes on shared use bicycles or public buses, so then you can get a really you get really good coverage of the most trafficked routes within the city. And then the other thing is that as the sensors and the electronics continue to get smaller and more compact, less expensive, we should get to a point where it'll be feasible to actually use these as wearables, so without it being a major annoyance, and then that would kind of lead the way to being able to do being able to do 24-hour personal monitoring of pollution exposure, so you'd be able to actually see yourself, identify any particular sources of pollution exposure that you come in contact with throughout your day. So I'll leave it there. So we're happy to take any questions.